So let me just ask you some simple questions then. So when were you born?
I was born 1921.
And what day and month?
October the 10th.
And where were you born?
At Millhouse Road at Crooks.
You were born at home?
Yep.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Oh dear, it's difficult this because my mother was married twice and she had a big family by her first husband who was called Townend, and when she married my father who was called Hollingworth, they had me. But my father also had a daughter from a previous marriage called Lillian. So I had about 7 half-brothers and 2 half-sisters, and I was the youngest.
Right. And how much were you the youngest by?
Pardon?
How much were you the youngest by? How much were you the youngest by?
Oh, I was the youngest by a long way. My mother was about 45 when I was born, so my stepbrothers were they were all in the 20s, and my stepsisters were too. Yeah.
So describe your first memory of Mulhouse Road.
Oh, well, it was a terrace house with a cellar, 2 ground floors, 2 bedrooms and an attic. No toilet, of course, and there was a stone sink with just cold water, no hot water. If you wanted anything in the way of a hot wash, then you had to boil the water over a gas ring.
So you had gas coming into the house?
Yes.
Do you have electricity?
No. No, the lighting was by gas, was gas mantles. I remember the electricity being put in when I was about, I would think I'd be about 9 or 10. Yeah.
And was that a big deal then? Did they put the electricity into the whole road, or
Pardon?
did they install the electricity up and down the road at the same time?
Well, I think that electricity had been installed in Millhouse Road for quite a while, but we were the last of the houses around us to have electricity. Yes.
And what did you first use electricity for?
Oh, we used it for cooking. We had a little electric oven, and we used to use it for boiling water as well. Had an electric kettle. It wasn't anything like the ones that you see now. It just looked like an ordinary electric kettle, like an ordinary kettle with a lid, and it used to whistle when the water started to boil.
The electric one did?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, that's a bit weird. So how old were you when you started going to school?
5.
And where did you go to school?
I went first of all to Crooks End Out School, which is still there now, but it's no longer a school. It's opposite the pub called, oh dear, I've forgotten its name. And it's next to Crooks Church.
Okay, the Grindstone, not the Grindstone.
No, it's not the Grindstone, it's the one higher up.
Right.
Yeah, near the top of School Road.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my teacher, when I was at Crooks End Out School, was a famous Sheffield comedian who you'll never have heard of, called Stainless Stephen.
Okay.
And his proper name was, oh dear, I can't remember. But he was friends with a well-known Sheffield cartoonist called Harry Heap, who used to do cartoons in the Green and the Star. And I once remember going caddying for them on the golf course at Beechiff, because Harry Heap was quite funny. Yeah.
Right, okay. So you used to sell the Greenham, didn't you?
Oh, when I was about 12, one of my stepbrothers had...
I think Mum's picked it up. I think Mum's picked it up, Dad.
Yeah.
So, but wasn't there a thing about Singapore? That you nearly get sent to Singapore?
Well, I consider myself to be one of the luckiest people alive, because I'd only been in the RAF 3 months when I was posted overseas, and you didn't know where you were going. And I came home on a week's embarkation leave, and then said goodbye to my mother, expecting that was the last of it. And when I got back, I discovered that I'd been taken off the draft that was going overseas, because the RAF had a rule that you couldn't be posted overseas until you'd been in at least 6 months. Well, I'd only been in 3. Well, some of the blokes that I was billeted with went on this draft, and you never knew where you were going. Your documents weren't posted to where you were going until you knew that you got there. And we got news that the documents were to be sent to Singapore. Well, the boat that I should have been on docked at Singapore about 3 weeks before the Japanese occupied it. So I never heard from any of them except one. And I had a pal called Bill Ponton, and he was in Singapore. And when the Japanese invaded, him and a group of other RAF blokes commandeered a little boat, and they set off to sail to Australia. And they got to us, well, they got nearly to Australia when they were picked up by an Australian destroyer.
Right.
And he told me that they loaded the boat with coal by hand, and when they left Singapore, they were sighted several times by Japanese aircraft, but for some reason they weren't attacked, and they finally made it.
Right, wow.
I remember meeting him after the war, purely by accident, Bill Ponton, when I was working at workshop, and he was a rep for another company, and we had a long talk about it. It was really interesting. Yeah.
What happened to the others then?
I never heard. I never heard.
And then when you were in the RAF, what were you doing? Were you Lancasters or...?
Well, the station at RAF St Athan, I was in the drawing office there, and we used to get aircraft from the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, and we used to get a prototype. And I remember the first one that I worked on was an Anson, and they sent about 30 more Ansons afterwards, and they converted them all to flying classrooms, and we had to do drawings of the first one that came, showing all the equipment that had been put in it, so that the other Ansons could be fitted out.
Right. Flying classrooms for training bomber crew?
Night fighters.
Right.
For night navigation, you know, they used to black out the windows, and they had a row of seats, all with a screen in front of them. And I mean, ever so crude in those days. It was really the beginnings of radar, and you had to be able to navigate in the dark without knowing where you were, using wireless as a means of a guide. And then apart from that, they used to send other aircraft in, like a Bristol Bullfighter, and that we did modifications to the cockpit on, and then they sent about another 30 Bullfighters in, and we used to convert them all to the same. So it was quite interesting, because we worked on a lot of different aircraft. I went in my first Stirling aircraft there, and the first 4-engine bomber. Anyway, I was then posted to Stoke Heath, to 24MU, and there they did nothing but repair and rebuild Lancasters. They used to come in on pieces, on the back of these huge RAF transporters called Queen Mary's, and we never had proper tools to dismantle them with or assemble them with, so we used to have to make drawings of all the tools and get them made ourselves. I mean, it was an experience. And I remember when we first started, it took us about a week to build the first Lancaster from pieces that came in. I always remember it because going inside the Lancaster, the first thing that you had to do was to clean out the blood from the gun turrets.
Right.
And I mean, they used to come in with gigantic holes in the fuselage and in the wings, and tails blown off. Well, it took us a week to build the first one, and after about 3 months we were building one a day, and then I think we finally got it where we were churning them out, you know, quite good. Yeah.
Right, and then do you test fly them then, or what was?
They were test flown at the 24MU. I had many a chance to go up, you know, you could go up just for a trip in a test flight. But I used to see some of the clowns that were repairing them and building them and that, and I mean, you know, they could hardly bloody read or write, some of them. You know, they were all doing it by what they'd been taught. You know, purely, and they didn't know what they were doing. And so I never went up.
Okay.
But we never had a single Lancaster that passed its test first time. Most of them used to take at least 10 tests. I got pally with 1 or 2 of the aircrew that used to test fly them, and they were given, it was like a rest job in between doing bombing raids, between doing ops, and they used to tell me that it was more dangerous test flying these Lancasters than going on hops. I've seen Lancasters flying round the aerodrome with one wheel down and one up. And I mean, that's disastrous for an aircraft trying to land. And I've seen the aircrew come round and deliberately bump the aircraft on its one wheel and then take off again to make the other wheel drop.
Right.
And then when the other one dropped, they used to have to bump them both on the floor to make sure that the undercarriage was locked.
Right.
Because one of the jobs that I did in the drawing office was the undercarriage for the Lancaster had several little things called limit switches that used to work, and they used to signal to lights in the cockpit to say that the undercarriage was down and when it was locked. Well, these lights weren't very reliable, so when the light didn't come on, the aircrew didn't know whether the undercarriage was locked or not. So they had to go through this performance of bumping them on the runway. But we never had one crash.
Right.
The other side of the aerodrome was called 5 PAFU, Pilots Advanced Flying Unit, and it was where they used to convert them from the old Tiger Moth, which was a biplane, to a single engine plane like the Harvard, and they had a lot of crashes over there. They were always landing and forgetting to put their undercarriage down.
Right.
Seen many a one on the runway, you know, belly up.
Alright, let's